But then he had this kind of killer line, which was a throwaway line. It's difficult. The public finances are difficult, and we may ask people to pay a bit more. And as far as I know, the tax system is not a cooperative system. You have to pay the tax.
Andy Burnham will be Prime Minister on Monday, and we're starting to get some indications of what kind of policies he wants to implement. The Times is reporting he's considering a wealth tax. Steve Swinford is the political editor of the Times. Morning, Steve.
Good morning.
How do we know he's considering a wealth tax? He took the very brave step of going on a podcast with his good friend Gary Lineker.
It's slightly surreal. So yeah, he popped up on a podcast. I'm not even sure if it was technically a podcast. It was a YouTube video of some form, but it wasn't. We were trying to find the name for the podcast last night, and there didn't appear to be one. So we just called it "He Told Gary Lineker," and he said that. He kind of oscillated on a wealth tax. He said, I'm not going to rule it out. I don't want to demonise wealthy people effectively. But then he had this kind of killer line, which was a throwaway line. It's difficult. The public finances are difficult, and we may ask people to pay a bit more. And as far as I know, the tax system is not a cooperative system. You have to pay the tax. But it is slightly surreal at the moment, because obviously we know so little about Andy Burnham's premiership, and we are learning bits and bobs here and there, including from an interview with Gary Lineker. And
actually, he's going to have to be a bit more disciplined than that, isn't it? You would have thought, because that is confirming a wealth tax, because he's basically saying some people will have to pay more than they currently pay. Well, that's an increase in tax, isn't it? And either he means that, and he should come out and say that and show his thinking and where it will impact the markets and impact all our lives, or he shouldn't say it till he's ready to say it. That feels like he's almost accidentally said that, perhaps.
I think that's probably right, and the point being that the weight of his words is so much more than it's ever been before. Everything he says is potentially newsworthy. Everything he says now has the potential to move markets. So what feels like a kind of semi-throwaway comment about a wealth tax, this was in the midst of a longer conversation about football, about England. He was quite downplaying their prospects, actually, as an Everton fan, and rightly in hindsight. But yeah, everything he says matters, and it can all shape, decisions that are being made by other people. So I think, I mean, maybe this is the kind of premiership we're going to get, where he will be just quite casual about things and say what he is genuinely thinking. But clearly he's mooting it, and he's just said that out loud.
Do you think he'll talk to the traditional media, Steve? I mean, this doesn't matter to many people. It matters to us on this programme a little bit, and but he has got this world in which he can bop around the north, where people will be very friendly to him. He can find some friendly podcasters and friendly YouTube people. He can communicate directly on TikTok and YouTube and X. I wonder how much he'll need to consider the traditional media.
I think he will. I think one of the things that you've noticed is this refusal to announce the cabinet until he gets into power has inevitably led to an enormous amount of speculation and pressure, particularly around the Chancellor point. And we are in a position now where, because of the reporting that we did on Monday, we are pretty sure it's going to be Shabana Mahmood at this stage rather than Ed Miliband. And they are annoyed with that, because they don't like the speculation, the gossip. But there are a lot of decision makers out there, a lot of people with businesses that are trying to work out what's going on, and a lot of journalists out there. So can he ignore the media? I think it's a two-pronged strategy, right? I think he's clearly someone who is going to be more comfortable on social media than Keir Starmer was, and they are going to use that. You're seeing that already with lots of videos, lots of podcasts, interviews, getting it out to other mediums. But look, he did do a big set-piece interview with us shortly before winning the Makerfield by-election. I'm sure he will do more in future, and he will inevitably do, you'd imagine, the BBC's flagship political show, not this Sunday but the one after, when he's in office. So with that job does come scrutiny, and that includes all forms of media. And if he wants to be an effective Prime Minister and communicate his message, then he's going to need to use all forms of media.
Including Times Radio, we'd like to think.
Including Times Radio, exactly.
Shabana Mahmood then as Chancellor, and we're with Anna Mihailova, we're trying to do a bit of shifting of the chairs then. If she is Chancellor, does that mean he needs a right-wing person for Home Secretary, which is kind of Wes Streeting, but Ed Miliband needs to go somewhere? So can he really go to Foreign Secretary? But he probably needs a woman as Foreign Secretary, or does he need to leave Yvette Cooper where she is? How does it all sort of throw out after the first decision? The dominoes now fall, don't they, after Shabana Mahmood as Chancellor?
You get into a crazy game of dominoes, because it's not clear what direction anything's going on. OK, you move Ed Miliband to Foreign Secretary. Well, I just happen to be acutely aware that the Trump administration is really concerned about Ed Miliband as Foreign Secretary. So do you take that move? Do you go to that position? Maybe you you move Wes into Home Secretary. He's always wanted to do that job. For what it's worth, someone was telling me he's going to go to Health, and it all sounds rather breathless and like we're playing some insane game of musical chairs here. And that's because, like, in my job particularly, what you are trying to do is separate out the speculation, which is everywhere, from what you actually tangibly know. And we know very little. We have one solid piece of information that we think Shabana Mahmood is going to be the Chancellor, but all of those other pieces could go anywhere. And so you get this crazy environment here in Westminster, Stig, where cabinet ministers are playing this game as well. This fantasy cabinet game of who could go where, why I should stay in my job, and you have these conversations with them, and you realise that there are so few people that actually know what is going to happen and where things are going to fall. That there is a degree. It doesn't become worthless, but it becomes, you just need to deal in tangibles, I think. So yes, but that is partly my job to try to find out where they are, Stig, and I'm sorry that I don't have more on that.
You've done a pretty good job with Shabana Mahmood, because that's sort of become firmed up, as you say, in the last few days or so. Great work, Steve. Good to speak to you.
Thank you.
That's
Cheers.
Steve Swinford there, the political editor of the Times. There was this narrative being... Kate and I were at an event yesterday together, and this guy came up to us and said, I really think if England win the World Cup, Burnham will call an early election. And that's not going to happen now. So the attention will just be on the more prosaic aspects of his government, including, and I've really enjoyed this story, this was Ed Miliband wasn't going to be Chancellor, then he was going to be Chancellor, then he wasn't, then he was, and now it's almost certainly Shabana Mahmood. Is that where we've got to?
It seems so. It seems that, the people very, very close to Andy Burnham, including reports suggest today, people like Louise Hay and Annalise Midgley, the two people who organised his campaign for Makerfield, they didn't want Miliband in. It seems that they've won in that battle. And Shabana Mahmood now is the front runner. She's almost the last one left standing. And she was, from an early point, considered a top candidate because she is on the moderate right wing of the party. She's been seen as a very effective minister, both in the Justice and now Home Brief. And I think that she's someone that the markets will find acceptable, but also voters will find acceptable. She's not as much of a known quantity as Miliband, who, voters chose not to put him in number 10 in 2015. And I think that ultimately Pete Burnham would have felt that that the public would have already made their mind up on Miliband.
And yet, she's a lawyer with no economic background. That's not uncommon when it comes to politicians. And it seems she didn't want the job. All the briefing that came out was, no, she's really happy at being Home Secretary. She didn't want it. So we're now going to end up with a Chancellor with no economic background who looked like, for a certain period of time, didn't want to do the job.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard her talk about economics, and I think I've asked a lot of Labour MPs the same thing, and they all say similarly that she doesn't have a background in this. She's a lawyer by trade. She's been, a very effective Home Secretary, but who knows what she thinks on the economy. And what I do know is that she is, broadly part of this blue Labour section of the party. So she's further to the left on the economy than, say, Wes Streeting would be, who's more a Blairite. But what that actually means in practice, we just don't know, because there isn't much of a track record there. I think that what Burnham will be banking on is that she's someone who is flexible enough to put through the agenda of Manchester, of greater devolution, potentially of greater tax and spend.
To people who say Andy Burnham has no mandate and avoids scrutiny, the fact that he sat down with Gary Lineker to give an interview is a pretty withering retort.
Yeah, it's not exactly a Paxman in his prime, is it? But look, he did provide some news for us, and he made some really interesting lines about a wealth tax, and he said that the government may have to come back for a little more and try to find more money for public spending, and the wealth tax in some form, whether that is taxing assets by raising capital gains tax, or it is a full-blooded wealth tax, is what we wait for. I mean, the one thing I will say is Jim O'Neill, the person who's expected to come in as his Treasury, his economic advisor, is very against wealth taxes. So I think that there will be some competing pressures here within his inner circle.
Interesting stuff. Nigel Farage, police have arrested a man for threatening to kill Reform leader Nigel Farage in a post on X. The timing is interesting because this seems to have taken place back in May, but the arrest seems to have taken place at a time when people like Reform were calling for more arrests like this to happen.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the suspect in question is alleged to have said on Twitter that he would kill Farage if he won. And I think that, this is clearly something which is going to have a lot more attention. And, frankly, there are a lot of threats online to politicians. Each each MP has their own story about being threatened online or in person at constituency surgeries. So this, if police are going to go after this more, I think that can only be a good thing, because the political violence in this country, can't be considered acceptable.
That's a very fair point, Stefan. Good to speak to you.